You know how people say you only get one mother? I used to believe that, too. My name's Nathan. I'm 29. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that being related to someone doesn't mean they deserve your loyalty. My mother, Margaret, was the kind of person who smiled like an angel in public, but tore you apart the second no one was watching. To outsiders, she was the sweetest woman, always helping at church, baking cookies for neighbors, and volunteering at charity events. But to me, she was a hurricane in heels, one that left emotional wreckage everywhere she went. Growing up, I thought her constant criticism was normal. She'd pick apart everything. My hair, my clothes, the way I spoke, even the way I breathed sometimes. Don't hunch like that, Nathan. You look weak, she'd say in front of my friends. Or, you're too sensitive. No girl will ever want someone who cries over nothing. I was 12 the first time she said that, and it stuck with me for years. My father, bless his quiet soul, never really stood up to her. He'd just murmur something like, "Let's not start this again," before retreating to his study. I think he learned long ago that standing up to her only made the storm worse. By the time I hit high school, I'd mastered the art of silence. The less I said, the less ammunition she had. But even silence wasn't safe. She'd accuse me of being moody or ungrateful. When I got my first girlfriend, Rachel, she went out of her way to get to know her. That meant cornering Rachel in the kitchen and asking questions like, "Do your parents know about Nathan's anger problems?" I didn't have anger problems. I had a mother who twisted every small outburst into a story about how volatile I was. The relationship didn't last long after that. Rachel stopped answering my calls. And when I asked why, she just said, "Your mom scared me." I thought she was exaggerating back then. I didn't realize how deep my mother's poison ran. Things only got worse as I grew older. Whenever I tried to bring someone new into my life, friends, girlfriends, coworkers, she'd find a way to ruin it. Once I invited a colleague over to study for an exam during college. My mother accidentally left out my old report cards from middle school on the table full of red marks and teacher comments like, "Needs improvement in attitude." When I confronted her, she said, "Oh, I just thought it'd be cute for her to see how far you've come." But she knew exactly what she was doing. That was her thing. Everything she did came with a sweet justification. She could destroy you with a smile. After college, I finally moved out. I thought distance would fix things, that maybe she'd mellow out once I wasn't under her roof. But she just switched tactics. The guilt tripping started. "You never call me, Nathan. Do you even care about your mother?" Or, "I'm so proud of your sister. She visits every week." You know, that's what real family does. My sister Rebecca had always been the golden child. Everything she did was perfect. If I brought home a B+, she brought home an A. If I bought Mom flowers, Rebecca bought her jewelry. But the truth was, Rebecca learned early that agreeing with Mom meant peace. She played along with the manipulation, sometimes even joining in. It hurt, but I couldn't blame her. Living under Mom's rule meant survival by compliance. The real breaking point came a few years later when I started dating a woman named Sophie. She was kind, patient, and most importantly, saw through my mother's fake charm from day one. I didn't introduce her right away. I wanted to keep something pure, untouched by Mom's influence. But Sophie insisted eventually. "She's your mom, Nathan." "I want to meet her," she said. I remember feeling a pit in my stomach, but I gave in. I told myself maybe Mom would behave this time. Maybe she'd changed. When we walked into her house that day, everything looked normal. The smell of pot roast filled the air. Soft music played in the background, and she greeted us with open arms. "Oh, so this is the famous Sophie," she beamed, pulling her into a hug that lasted a bit too long. "Nathan told me so much about you." I exhaled, thinking, maybe this won't be so bad. I should have known better. The first half hour went fine. Small talk, stories about childhood, some forced laughter. But as soon as Sophie went to the bathroom, my mother leaned in close, her voice low and sharp. "Don't get too attached," she whispered. "You deserve better than him. He's difficult." When Sophie came back, my mother's smile returned and the conversation carried on as if nothing happened. I wanted to believe maybe I misheard her. That night, Sophie didn't say much, but I could tell something was off. It wasn't until days later that she told me the truth. Apparently, Mom had called her after dinner saying she needed to warn her about me. According to Sophie, my mother said, "He's dangerous. You need to stay away from him." Dangerous. That word broke something in me. I confronted Mom immediately and she didn't even deny it. She just said, "I was protecting her. You always attract fragile girls who can't handle you." I hung up on her that night, shaking with anger. It wasn't just manipulation anymore. It was character assassination. After that, I went no contact for almost a year. It was peaceful for the first time in my life. Sophie and I grew closer and I started feeling like I could finally breathe. But my mother found ways to sneak back in, random emails, birthday cards with passive-aggressive notes like, "I miss the son I used to know." And then came the guilt calls from Rebecca. "Nathan, Mom's been crying every night. She says you hate her. Just talk to her." I refused. I told Rebecca I was done playing her emotional puppet. Still, part of me wondered, was I being too harsh? That doubt, that little hook she'd planted years ago, still pulled at me. Months passed and I thought I was finally free. But then out of nowhere, I got a call from my dad. His voice was softer than usual, almost trembling. "Your mom's 60th is coming up," he said. "We're throwing her a big party. She wants you there." I laughed at first, thinking it was a joke, but he sounded serious. "She's been talking about you nonstop. She said she wants to make things right." I told him I'd think about it, but deep down, something inside me stirred. For the first time, I didn't feel scared. I felt curious. If she wanted to see me again, maybe this was my chance. Not for reconciliation, but for something else entirely. I couldn't explain it, but the thought of walking into that party, her party, filled me with a strange sense of calm. After everything she'd done, all the relationships she'd sabotaged, the humiliation, the lies, the manipulation, maybe it was time she learned what it felt like to be exposed, to be humiliated in front of everyone she wanted to impress. And that's when the idea began to take shape. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I knew one thing for certain. On her big birthday, the woman who spent years destroying my life would finally get a taste of her own medicine. That was the moment I decided I was going to make her feel everything she'd ever made me feel, slowly, perfectly, and in public. But before I could do that, I needed to go back to the beginning, to the part of my life I'd spent years trying to forget. Because to truly ruin someone like my mother, you first have to understand the way she built her kingdom. After I told myself I'd make her feel what she'd done to me, I didn't jump straight to planning some grand spectacle. You don't topple an empire overnight. You gather intelligence. You wait for the right crack to widen. So I started small, letting myself watch from a distance to see if anything had changed. That's when the patterns came back, familiar as fingers on a piano. The more I watched, the more I realized how much of my life she had quietly redirected without me ever noticing. It wasn't just the big moments she ruined. It was the steady erosion, the little comments, the deliberate omissions, the strategic favors that made her look saintly and everyone else look flawed. Rebecca was the easiest instrument for her to play. She'd always been compliant, but lately she'd taken it up a notch. Whenever she visited, Mom would make a show of hugging her and saying, "Isn't Rebecca just so thoughtful?" Then later, she'd call me and say things like, "Rebecca suggested we put together a slideshow for my birthday. She found all these old photos. Do you have any you want included?" It sounded harmless. I sent a couple of childhood pictures. Me at 8. A goofy grin. Mom making that proud face. I thought it would be a peace offering of sorts. I didn't realize it was ammunition. In the slideshow, she carefully cropped me out of a photo where I was standing next to her, leaving Rebecca front and center as if I'd never existed in those family memories. It was a small cruelty, but she loved small cruelties. They're harder to catch, and when you do, people assume you're overreacting. She also started inviting people I hadn't seen in years, neighbors who used to praise her lemon bars, the church ladies who wore matching hats, my dad's coworkers. I could tell she was painting a picture, one of a perfect matriarch surrounded by adoring faces. When I spoke to my dad about it, he shrugged like he always did. "She's excited, Nathan. It's her big day. Excitement in her vocabulary seemed to include rewriting history. The invitations were subtle, but their message was loud. This was a celebration of everything she'd done well, and anyone who might remind her guests otherwise needed to be left out. Then there was the whisper campaign. It started with an offhand text from an old friend. "Hey Nathan, heard about your mom's party, wondering if you're coming. People are talking." Another text arrived from someone I barely knew. "Your mom mentioned something about you. Hope everything's okay." Each message came with a kernel of gossip, always ending with a hint that I was the difficult one. My mother had an old network of people who loved to take her at face value. She knew how to throw a seed and make it bloom into suspicion. If she couldn't openly slander me, she'd seed doubts that made everyone else do the dirty work for her. What stung the most, though, was Rebecca's role. I used to think she didn't realize what Mom did, but that comfort was gone now. Rebecca wasn't just playing along. She was embellishing. When I tried to set boundaries, she'd show up with some version of Mom's story, polished and rehearsed. "She's been so fragile about you, Nathan. She keeps saying she doesn't understand what she did wrong." It was the same line Mom used to get sympathy, and Rebecca watched the room fold around her. I remember one lunch when Rebecca said almost cheerfully, "You know, Mom thinks you purposely isolate yourself. She says you punish people." I told her she was lying, and she tightened her jaw as if she'd been instructed to do so. There was a coldness in her eyes I hadn't seen before, like she'd chosen a side, not out of pressure, but for the ease it gave her life. The gaslighting wasn't always verbal. My mother started showing up at events she'd never attended before, always on the day I had something important, my book launch, a small gallery showing I'd been working on for months. She'd arrive late with a plate of homemade cookies and sit in the corner, smiling as if she belonged. When people came to congratulate me, she'd lean in and quietly tell them, "Nathan's temper flares when things don't go his way." It was always a casual aside, but it landed like a nail. People softened. They took a step back, and the congratulations lost their warmth. I began to anticipate her presence like bad weather, preparing myself for the inevitable drizzle of undermining comments that followed. At work, the rumors crept, too. "Watch how you talk about family," my manager warned after a supervisor mentioned something Mom had told them during a volunteer drive our company partnered on. I wasn't sure which was worse, the slander itself or the way it made me doubt my own perceptions. I found myself replaying every conversation with her, searching for the moment I might have provoked this. The doubt was a weapon she wielded often. If she could get you to question whether you were the problem, she had already won. More than anything, she loved control over narratives. She'd give gifts that required public acknowledgement, expensive framed prints to community boards, lavish donations in her name, and then make sure the press release mentioned her sacrifice. People would call her generous and she would bask in it. Meanwhile, when I did something quietly kind, helping a neighbor fix a lawn mower, staying late to help a colleague, she made sure the story didn't get told. She would tell those same people things about me that made them tilt their heads. "He's always been a bit withdrawn," she'd say. "Maybe that's why he drifts away sometimes." It wasn't enough to be kind. She had to redefine my kindness as something suspect. The more she consolidated her image, the more isolated I felt. Friends who had stuck around began to behave differently, polite, careful, as if they might say the wrong thing and be cut off at the root. Sophie, who had been my refuge, started pulling away. She wasn't being melodramatic. She was tired. She told me, "Nathan, I can't keep being the person who defends you every time she throws something out there. It's exhausting." She didn't know the half of it. She didn't know that when Rebecca visited, my mother would pull Sophie aside and say, "I'm just trying to protect you. Men like Nathan can be dangerous, unstable. I worry for your future." Hearing that, Sophie would look at me with a mixture of pity and fear. And though she didn't leave right away, the distance between us grew like a shadow under a door. And then my father started to change. He was always indecisive, but lately, his acquiescence seemed more like resignation. He would call to warn me in a hesitating voice. "Don't say anything that'll cause a scene at the party," as if he believed peace meant silence even when silence cost me. He told me that Mom wanted everything to be perfect, that she was fragile. I knew fragility when I saw it. People who used the word to demand indulgence were rarely fragile at all. They were architects of manipulation. Still, Dad's pleas pulled on something in me. I loved him. I didn't want to hurt him or embarrass him in front of his friends, but every request to stay quiet felt like another brick in the wall Mom was building between us. In the weeks leading up to the party, the tension tightened like a drawn bow. Invitations kept arriving. Each RSVP a tally mark on a ledger that favored Mom. I started receiving calls from people I rarely spoke to, strangers wrapped in condolence about family issues or casual warnings about people changing. Every call, every message seemed orchestrated. I began to suspect that Mom had compiled a dossier on me, a curated record of all my perceived flaws draped in the soft language of concern. It gave her plausible deniability when she lied and a ready script when others needed convincing. Despite all that, a part of me still wanted to believe in the myth of a mother who could be redeemed. Maybe that's the cruelest part, that even after years of emotional sabotage, the hope for reconciliation lingered like an ember. I told myself I could go to the party and keep my guard up, observe, and leave without incident. But the more I watched, the more I noticed the little traps she set to make me look unstable. She wasn't relying on a single dramatic moment to discredit me. She'd been laying 1,000 needles around me so that when someone brushed past, blood would appear and people would murmur that I'd been the violent one all along. The last week before the birthday was when things escalated in a way that felt almost theatrical. My mother called my sister and asked her to handle seating arrangements, quietly insisting I be placed at a table with people who were either unfamiliar with me or easily swayed by her words. She wrote a speech. Oh, she absolutely wrote a speech about gratitude and family with a few gentle lines about perseverance that were clearly meant to cast me as the prodigal son she'd forgiven. My dad practiced it with her, reading it aloud in the living room while she nodded and smiled like a saint rehearsing martyrdom. I got an invitation in the mail with my name printed under honored guests, a move that felt like a baited hook. Come and let us praise you for forgiving us, stay away and we'll say that you've chosen to be the villain. On the morning of the party, Mom sent a group text, one of those notes that read like a sermon, thanking everyone for being part of her life and asking them to show grace to those who had made mistakes. She included an emoji of a dove. In the same breath, she privately messaged a few select people with concerns about me, calling me sensitive and unpredictable. The contradiction didn't bother her. It was all strategy. By day, she was the dove, and by whisper, she was the wolf. Standing outside her house an hour before guests arrived, I felt a weird calm again. The air smelled like cut grass and the faint trace of lemons, cleaner, her trademark. I could see her through the kitchen window, fussing over a floral arrangement, a perfect hostess smile fixed in place. She looked like a photograph of herself, composed, radiant, oblivious to the wreckage underfoot. My phone buzzed with a message from Rebecca. You ready? Mom's going to be so happy to have you there. There was a little heart emoji. I could have turned around then. I could have walked away and left her to bask in her perfection. But something in me had shifted from hurt to purpose. I wasn't going to simply show up and play the forgiving son she expected. I wanted to expose the scaffolding of her deceit. I wanted people to see the work that went into her perfection. I wanted my name not to disappear. Just as I was about to head to the door, Dad appeared, his face more lined than usual. He looked at me like he'd been carrying a silent apology for years and was finally giving it to me. Son, he said, if you're going to do anything, say something, just think about Mom's heart. The plea was sincere, and it landed heavy. I realized then that whatever I planned, it couldn't be a spectacle that crushed him. The knives were sharp on both sides. They cut through the people I loved as easily as they cut through the person who'd hurt me. I stood there, thumb hovering over the doorknob, and for a second, all the years washed over me at once, the ridicule, the ruined relationships, the nights I cried alone. Then the door opened and Mom stepped out in a dress that made her look younger than she was, her smile wide and practiced. She wrapped me in a hug that felt like a show for the window, then pulled back and said loud enough for the neighbors who were tidying up the bunting to hear, Nathan, thank you for coming. It means the world. The words were genuine sounding, but her eyes flicked past me as if searching the crowd for witnesses. I heard a muffled laugh from inside. Rebecca, I guessed. The engine of the party was firing up. I stepped across the threshold and the house seemed to hold its breath. People turned. Hugs were dished out. Compliments about her cooking, her decorations, her graciousness floated around me like confetti. I smiled politely and people smiled back. Some warm, some suspicious, some the kind of smile that naturally follows someone everyone expects to be a certain way. I felt my pulse in my throat, the adrenaline of being seen. This was the field where she fought best, where her performance turned into armor. I told myself I'd be careful, that I'd watch and collect, that I'd wait for the right moment. But almost immediately, someone I hadn't seen in years approached, and without missing a beat, leaned in with a whisper for the ages. "Isn't it so brave of you to come after everything?" The sentence was soft, but it was the exact language she'd trained people to use. Pity wrapped as praise. And then Rebecca took the microphone. The microphone squealed a little as Rebecca tapped it, smiling like she'd just been handed an award. "Hi, everyone," she said, her voice sweet and a little shaky in that practiced way that people use when they want to seem humble. "Before Mom gives her speech, I just wanted to say a few words about how amazing she is and how proud I am that we get to celebrate her tonight." The guests murmured with approval. My mother, standing a few feet away, pretended to blush. I stood near the back, arms crossed, pretending to sip my drink. I thought I'd seen every manipulation trick in her book, but I was about to learn she had an entire chapter I'd missed. "We put together something special," Rebecca continued. "A little trip down memory lane." The first slide came up, a photo of my mom and dad at their wedding. The crowd cooed. Then one of Rebecca as a baby, another of the three of them together, Mom in the middle like the sun in every orbit. A few photos of family trips followed, carefully selected to highlight her as the perfect mother. Mom teaching Rebecca to ride a bike. Mom at Rebecca's graduation. Mom baking cookies in the kitchen. I waited for something, anything, with me in it. Then one appeared. It was a photo of me, maybe 15, standing awkwardly at the edge of a family barbecue. Everyone else was laughing mid-conversation. My mother had captioned it in elegant cursive at the bottom of the slide. "Nathan always had his moody moments, but we loved him anyway." Laughter filled the room. Not cruel exactly, just that collective sympathetic chuckle people make when they think they're sharing in a harmless joke. I felt my chest tighten. Rebecca clicked to the next slide. Another photo of me, younger this time, at my desk surrounded by crumpled paper. The caption read, "A writer in the making, even if he preferred brooding over helping with dishes." More laughter. I could feel the heat rising in my face. My mother stood nearby, covering her mouth, acting embarrassed. "Oh, Rebecca," she said, giggling. "I told you not to include that one." But she didn't look at me once. It went on like that. Every slide with me in it came with a backhanded caption. "Our difficult teenager, the rebel phase, Nathan learning to apologize." And when the photos of Rebecca appeared, they were all glowing tributes. The pride of our family, Mom's best helper, always by our side. The crowd was eating it up. My father clapped at one point, oblivious to the subtle cruelty unfolding. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window, jaw clenched, smile fixed, and I realized I was playing the role she'd written for me. The stoic, distant son who couldn't take a joke. Then Rebecca said something that turned the room. "And now," she began, voice thick with fake emotion, "we wanted to include a little story that Mom told me recently, something that really shows how strong she is." I froze. A story? That wasn't part of the plan. She clicked again and the screen changed to a grainy photo of my mom sitting in the hospital waiting room years ago, the day I'd had my appendectomy at 17. I remembered it vividly. I'd been terrified and she'd spent the whole night scolding me for making a scene. But now Rebecca was narrating a very different version. When Nathan was 17, she said, he had to go into emergency surgery. Mom was so scared, but she stayed up all night holding his hand, praying he'd be okay. What most people don't know, she added, lowering her voice, is that around that time, Nathan was struggling a lot. He was angry, confused, even destructive. The word hit me like a punch. But Mom never gave up on him, Rebecca continued. She told me, even when Nathan lashed out, I knew it wasn't really him. It was just pain. The audience made sympathetic noises. I saw a few people glance my way, then quickly looked down. My mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Perfect performance. I felt the floor tilt under me. That story wasn't just exaggerated. It was a complete lie. I never lashed out. I'd gotten upset once when she accused me of faking pain to get attention, and I'd raised my voice. That was it. But in her version, I'd become some troubled kid she'd heroically endured. I could have walked out then. I almost did. But something in me wanted to see how far she'd go. Rebecca advanced to the final slide. A photo of my mother with her arms around both of us. I was maybe 20, Rebecca 22. I remembered that day. We'd gone to a local fair, and right before the photo, my mother had whispered, "Stand closer to your sister. You look cold." The caption this time wasn't a joke. It was a statement: a mother's love never fails. When the lights came back on, the room erupted in applause. People were wiping tears. My mother waved them off humbly, smiling through the attention. "Oh, stop," she said. "Rebecca did all the work. I just lived the story." That line, "I just lived the story," it landed like a spark on dry wood. The rest of the evening moved like a fog. People lined up to hug her, to tell her how inspiring she was. I stood on the periphery, invisible again. I tried to avoid her, but of course, she found me. She always found me. "Wasn't that beautiful?" she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "Rebecca worked so hard on it." I stared at her. "You told her to say those things," I said quietly. She blinked, feigning surprise. "What things?" "That I was dangerous. Angry. That I lashed out. You made me look like some kind of problem child." Her smile didn't falter. "Oh, Nathan, don't be dramatic. People like honesty. They relate to struggle." She leaned in closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. "Besides, it's good for you. Makes you look human." "Human," I hissed. "You turned me into your redemption arc." She tilted her head, still smiling for the onlookers. "You should thank me. It's the first time people have ever applauded you." That was it. The shift. The quiet surgical cruelty I'd endured my whole life had just been broadcast to 50 people under the guise of sentimentality. It wasn't enough for her to control the narrative privately anymore. She needed an audience. I turned to walk away, but she caught my sleeve. "Nathan," she said, voice suddenly cold. "Don't make a scene. This is my night." For a split second, I saw something flicker behind her eyes, fear maybe, or the realization that she'd pushed too far. Then it vanished, replaced by that same poised calm she wore like perfume. "Smile," she said softly. "People are watching." I smiled. Not for her. For myself. Because in that moment, something hardened inside me. Whatever lingering hope I'd had of reconciliation evaporated. This wasn't a woman who could change. This was someone who built her power on illusion, who thrived on the humiliation of others, even her own child. The rest of the evening dragged on. My father gave a toast, nervous and trembling, mostly thanking her for holding the family together. She wept on cue. Guests handed her gifts wrapped in gold paper. I stood by the window, staring out at the dark yard, running through every memory she'd ever rewritten. I realized that night wasn't just another example of her cruelty. It was the clearest declaration yet that she would never stop unless someone forced her to. And that's when the final blow came. Toward the end of the night, my father called for attention again. "Before we end," he said, "Margaret has something special she wants to share." She walked up to the microphone, smiling as the room fell silent. "Thank you all," she began, "for being part of this journey. Family means everything to me, and tonight I wanted to do something to honor that." I felt a strange unease crawl up my spine. She turned toward me. "Nathan," she said, "I know things between us haven't always been easy. You've struggled and I've made mistakes, but I've been praying for a way to show you that I still believe in you." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. She gestured to Rebecca, who handed her a white envelope. "I've been talking to my lawyer," she said. "I decided to make a few updates to my will. Rebecca doesn't even know this part." She paused, smiling wide enough for everyone to see. "I've set aside something for you, Nathan. A little fun to help you get back on your feet." She said the words slowly, deliberately, savoring the humiliation. People clapped. Clapped. A fun to get back on my feet, like I was some tragic failure she was rescuing. I could see Rebecca's expression tighten, half confused, half sympathetic, but she didn't intervene. My father looked at the floor. "Mom," I said quietly. "What are you doing?" "Oh, come on," she laughed. "Don't look so serious. Everyone knows families have ups and downs." That was the moment the betrayal fully sank in. Not just the slideshow, not just the lies, but the realization that this woman would never love me without conditions. Every apology was a performance. Every gesture staged. She'd weaponized my life for applause. The crowd started to disperse into chatter again, clinking glasses and exchanging smiles. She stood there basking in her own benevolence, a queen in her castle of illusions. And as I watched her soak in the attention, I felt something icy and precise forming in my chest. Not rage, not despair, but clarity. This wasn't about fighting her anymore. It was about dismantling her image piece by piece, just the way she'd done to me. She thought she could humiliate me in front of everyone. But what she didn't know, what no one in that room knew yet, was that I'd been preparing for this for months. And by the time her perfect little kingdom fell apart, every single one of them would see who she truly was. After that night, I stopped visiting the house completely. Not even holidays, not birthdays, not quick check-ins, not even the guilt-laden texts my sister kept sending about keeping family ties. I was done pretending I didn't see the knife in her hand just because she smiled while holding it. But walking away from my mother wasn't freedom right away. It was withdrawal. That party had left something raw and unsteady inside me, like the ground had been yanked out and I was still trying to find balance. For weeks, I replayed that night over and over in my head. Her voice dripping with that fake tenderness, the crowd clapping, the pity in their eyes when she called me troubled. I'd wake up in the middle of the night hearing her words echo, "I've set aside something for you, Nathan. A little fun to help you get back on your feet." It wasn't generosity. It was a carefully sharpened insult disguised as kindness. Sophie tried to comfort me at first, but even she didn't fully understand. "You can't let her live in your head like this," she told me one night as we sat on the couch. "She wins every time you think about her." I nodded, but deep down I knew it wasn't that simple. You can't just evict someone who built your house, even if they built it wrong. Still, I tried. I buried myself in work. I was writing full-time then, mostly freelance pieces and ghostwriting for blogs that paid little but kept me busy. Each morning, I'd make coffee, sit at my small desk, and tell myself that today I wouldn't think about her. Some days it worked. Others, I'd find myself frozen mid-sentence, remembering the look on her face when people applauded her lies. The silence after cutting her off was strange. For most of my life, chaos had been my baseline. Without her calls, the noise, the constant second-guessing, the house felt too quiet. The absence of her manipulation was its own kind of haunting. But slowly, in that silence, I started to hear something else, my own voice again. Months passed. I wrote more, got a few good clients, started selling short stories to small magazines. My editor once told me, "You write pain like you've lived it." I laughed because I had. The more I wrote, the more it stopped being about her and started being about me, about taking ownership of the narrative she'd stolen. And yet, every success brought a new wave of guilt. Years of conditioning had taught me that anyone was supposed to be shared with her. I'd catch myself drafting a message to tell her about a publication or a milestone, then delete it before sending. That reflex, that desire for her validation, was the hardest chain to break. Then one afternoon about 8 months after the party, Rebecca showed up at my apartment unannounced. I hadn't seen her since that night. She looked nervous, holding a paper bag of muffins like it was an olive branch. "Can I come in?" she asked. I hesitated then nodded. She sat on the couch fidgeting with her sleeves. "Mom's been worried about you," she said softly. I laughed bitterly. "She's worried I'll embarrass her again." "No," Rebecca said quickly. "It's different now. She's been saying she wants to make peace." "Peace?" I repeated, the word tasting foreign. "Did she send you?" She hesitated, which told me everything I needed to know. She feels bad about what happened. She didn't mean to hurt you." "Rebecca," I said, my voice low, "she wrote a speech that called me unstable. She planned it. That wasn't a mistake." Rebecca looked down. "I know, but she's been crying a lot. Dad says she's not sleeping." "Good," I said before I could stop myself. Maybe she'll finally know what it feels like. There was a long silence. Then she said something that stuck with me. You can't fix her, Nathan. But you can stop her from fixing you into what she wants. I didn't respond. She left soon after, leaving the muffins on the counter. I didn't eat them, but I didn't throw them away either. That night, I sat staring at my laptop, an unfinished story open on the screen. It was about a man who spent his life trying to please a God who only rewarded suffering. I closed it and opened a new document. For the first time, I didn't write for clients or magazines. I started writing about her, about the humiliation, the lies, the manipulation disguised as love. I didn't name her, but every line carried her shadow. I wrote until sunrise, and for the first time in my life, I felt lighter. The story was raw, ugly, and honest. I submitted it to a small literary journal under a pseudonym. I didn't expect much, but 3 weeks later they accepted it. And not only that, it got picked up by a larger publication. People connected to it. They wrote comments about their own controlling parents, their own need for approval, their own healing. It was the first time I realized my pain could be repurposed into something useful. After that, the work snowballed. My inbox filled with offers from editors and magazines. I got invited to write a column on family psychology and emotional manipulation. Ironic considering my background. I started earning good money, enough to move into a new apartment with sunlight and space. Sophie and I patched things up, too. She said seeing me finally stand up for myself made her fall in love with me all over again. For a while, it felt like I'd won, like I'd finally broken free. But I should have known better. My mother never let go of control. She just changed the form it took. It started with subtle reappearances. A shared post on Facebook of one of my articles with a caption like, "So proud of my son for using his struggles to help others." Struggles, her favorite word. Then she started messaging some of my followers pretending to be the inspiration behind my work. She even left a comment under one of my posts that said, "Love seeing my little boy turning pain into purpose. We've come such a long way." I deleted the comment immediately, but not before a few hundred people saw it. Some even replied with hearts, saying how beautiful it was that I had such a supportive mother. I sat staring at the screen, trembling with anger. She was rewriting the story again, this time in public. I tried ignoring her, blocked her, deleted her comments, moved on, but she found ways around it. New accounts, emails from friends of hers congratulating me. My father sent me a message once saying, "Your mother says you've forgiven her." I'm so glad. I hadn't forgiven her. I'd barely begun to live without her shadow. That's when something shifted again. Not in anger this time, but in purpose. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to her. I was studying her. Every word she posted, every false kindness, every attempt to insert herself into my success, it all revealed something about her pattern. She needed proximity to power. She couldn't stand being irrelevant. And now, for once, I had the power. People read my work. They respected me. They listened when I spoke about emotional abuse and manipulation. I was slowly becoming the authority on the exact thing she'd used to destroy me. That irony didn't escape me. I started saying yes to interviews, podcasts, panels, even a small TV appearance. I never mentioned her name, but I talked about parents who perform love for the public while dismantling their children in private. Every time I spoke, I imagined her watching, realizing she couldn't control the narrative anymore. Then came the real turning point. A publisher reached out about turning my essays into a book. I didn't say yes right away, but the idea lingered. I knew what kind of book I'd write if I ever did it. Not a self-help guide, a story. My story, the truth, stripped of her embellishments. That's when I realized maybe the best revenge wasn't a dramatic confrontation or public humiliation. Maybe it was success so undeniable that her version of me couldn't survive alongside it. Still, part of me wanted more. The part that remembered her at that microphone, smiling as people clapped for her forgiveness. That moment had been designed to humiliate me. And some nights, the memory still stung enough to keep me awake. So when I got invited to speak at a local community event, one that my mother's church group often attended, I didn't hesitate. I accepted quietly. No big announcement. The theme was overcoming toxic family dynamics. The irony was almost poetic. The night before the event, I couldn't sleep. I kept pacing, wondering if I'd gone too far, if showing up would make me just like her, performing my pain for an audience. But then I remembered how she'd rewritten my life for years, how she'd forced her version of me into the world without my consent. This wasn't performance. This was reclamation. When I arrived, I saw familiar faces from her world, neighbors, old friends, even a few of her church ladies. I recognized the look of surprise when they saw my name on the program. I smiled politely, shook hands, and waited for my turn to speak. And when they called me up, the first words out of my mouth weren't rehearsed. I looked at the crowd and said, "Sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones who taught you how to hide pain behind a smile." A few heads nodded. I spoke for 20 minutes. Not about her specifically, but about control, guilt, and manipulation disguised as concern. I could see the recognition in people's eyes, the realization that they'd lived through similar things. When it was over, people clapped softly, some teary-eyed. And standing there under the stage lights, I felt something I'd never felt before in her presence. Power that wasn't borrowed or conditional. It was mine. Later, as I was packing up my notes, one of the church ladies came up and said, "Your mother would be proud if she were here." I smiled politely and said, "She's not proud. She's terrified." Because I knew now she couldn't silence me anymore. What I didn't know yet was that my rising success would soon threaten the one thing she valued more than control, her reputation. And when that happened, she'd do something far worse than I ever expected. The moment that woman said my mother would be proud, something clicked in me. I realized that pride was exactly what she depended on, her reputation was oxygen. If I could take that from her, she'd finally know what it felt like to suffocate. For a while, I didn't move on it. I told myself I'd already won. I was free. I was successful. I was happy. But there was a quiet voice that wouldn't leave me alone, the one that remembered every tear she'd caused, every time she'd turned people I loved against me, every lie she'd told so convincingly that I'd started to doubt my own memories. That voice whispered, "You can forgive yourself without forgiving her." And then I stumbled onto something unexpected. It started with an email from a journalist who'd read one of my essays. She said she was doing a piece on performative kindness in public figures and wanted to interview me about toxic family reputations. I almost said no until I saw the list of people she'd already interviewed. My mother's name was on it. Apparently, she'd been nominated for a local hero award through her church's charity network. They were doing a human interest story about her years of selfless service. The journalist wanted my perspective on growing up in such an inspiring household. That's when the plan began forming, not in anger, but in perfect, steady clarity. I agreed to the interview, but I didn't give her the story my mother expected. I didn't rant or accuse. I simply told the truth, calmly, factually. How appearances can be a kind of armor. How some people weaponize kindness to control others. I mentioned no names, but every person who knew her would recognize the portrait. The journalist was sharp. She asked good questions. When I finished, she said quietly, "You've given me a lot to think about." I didn't hear from her again for weeks. Then one morning, the story dropped. The headline read, "When Kindness Has a Price, Behind the Masks of Local Charity Culture." It wasn't a direct exposé, but my mother's quotes were there, her usual sentimental lines about helping those who can't help themselves, followed immediately by anecdotes from a family member describing emotional manipulation and control disguised as generosity. The juxtaposition was brutal. The article went viral in our small town. Within a day, the comments section was full of people whispering about who the family member might be. It didn't take long before someone connected the dots. I didn't have to confirm it. I didn't have to say a word. She did what she always did. She called me first, with that brittle tone she used when she wanted to sound reasonable. "Nathan, I read something this morning. Tell me it's not about me." I didn't respond. "Nathan," she said again, sharper now. "This could ruin everything I've built. You think people won't know it's me? You've made me look like a monster." I let the silence hang. Then I said, "You did that all by yourself." She exhaled, the sound shaking slightly. "You're going to regret this," she whispered. "You can't destroy your own mother." I almost laughed. "You destroyed yourself the moment you made me your story." And I hung up. For days, I didn't check the news. I didn't want to gloat, but the fallout was impossible to ignore. The church quietly distanced itself from her. The charity she'd chaired for years announced they were restructuring leadership. The local hero nomination vanished. People stopped calling her for luncheons, book clubs, and fundraisers. She tried to fight back at first, posting long Facebook updates about being misunderstood and betrayed, but her words rang hollow. Everyone had seen her name beside those quotes. Everyone remembered the family parties, the stories, the little cracks that didn't line up with her saintly image. The truth didn't need defending anymore. It was visible. Rebecca called me again a week later. "What did you do?" she asked quietly. "I told the truth," I said. She was silent for a long moment. Then she sighed. "She's different now. Quieter. Keeps saying she never thought you'd turn against her." "I didn't turn against her," I said. "I stopped protecting her. I thought that would be the end of it." But revenge, I learned, doesn't always land cleanly. It echoes. A month later, I was invited to give a talk at a writers' conference about using personal trauma in storytelling. When I walked on stage, I noticed a few familiar faces in the audience. Rebecca was there. So was my father. But in the back, sitting small and still, was my mother. She looked diminished. Not defeated exactly, but fragile in a way I'd never seen. For a moment, a strange pang of pity stirred in me. Then I remembered all the times I'd begged her to stop, all the times she'd smiled while twisting the knife. So I told the story, not her version. The truth. I spoke about growing up under control disguised as love, about the way abusers hide behind reputation, about how silence protects them. I didn't name her, but the air in the room was electric. People knew. They could feel the authenticity in every word. When I finished, there was a long silence, then applause that built and built until it felt like thunder. I looked up and met her eyes across the crowd. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She just looked stunned, like for the first time in her life, she realized her words didn't matter anymore. Afterward, people came up to thank me, to share their stories, to say I'd given them courage. I shook hands, smiled, and felt something settle in my chest, peace that I hadn't known I was capable of. As I was packing up, Rebecca approached, hesitant. "She heard you," she said softly. "I don't know what she'll do with it, but she heard you." I nodded. That's all I needed. That night, I got one last message from my mother. It wasn't long, just a single sentence, "You win." For a moment, I just stared at it. Then I deleted it and turned off my phone. Because it wasn't about winning anymore. It was about ending the story she'd tried to write for me. And for the first time, I was the one holding the pen. In the weeks that followed, the silence was different. Not heavy, not tense, just still. My mother disappeared from every social circle that used to worship her. The church quietly removed her from the volunteer board. Her charity committee was reassigned under new management. Friends she used to gossip with stopped returning calls. Even the neighbors, people who once waved at her every morning, pretended not to see her. For the first time, her world stopped revolving around her. And she hated it. I didn't gloat. I didn't post anything. I didn't speak her name. The irony was I didn't need to. The truth had momentum now. It didn't need my push anymore. It simply lived quietly, reshaping the way people saw her. Every kind act she'd once performed was now re-examined under the right light, and people started to notice the pattern that had been there all along, the way she talked over others, the way she made every conversation orbit around herself, the subtle digs disguised as jokes. She wasn't seen as evil. She was seen as fake. And to her, that was worse than being hated. Rebecca told me that she'd tried to host a small dinner to clear the air. Only a handful of people showed up, mostly out of pity. Someone mentioned the article and apparently Mom broke down, full tears, saying things like, "I gave everything to that boy. I did my best." But for once, nobody rushed to comfort her. Nobody played the audience. They just watched her unravel. And she couldn't stand that kind of silence, the kind that means people no longer believe you. She stopped attending church after that, stopped posting pictures online. Even her once perfect garden, the pride of the neighborhood, started to wilt. Rebecca said she spends most mornings sitting on the porch, staring at the yard, waiting for someone to stop by. Nobody does. My father, on the other hand, started to change. It was subtle at first, a text here, a photo of the sunrise there. But soon he began visiting me regularly. We'd get coffee, talk about normal things. Sometimes he'd bring up the past in small doses. I should have done more, he admitted one day. I thought keeping the peace was the same as keeping you safe. I told him it wasn't his fault, and for the first time, he looked relieved, like someone had lifted a weight off his chest he didn't realize he'd been carrying for decades. As for Rebecca, she and I started rebuilding slowly, carefully. She admitted she'd always been scared of being on Mom's bad side, that playing along felt safer. I didn't excuse it, but I understood it. We'd both grown up under the same dictator, only I'd stopped saluting sooner. Eventually, my mother tried to reach out again. A letter this time, 4 pages, handwritten, her perfect cursive still untouched by time. It started with an apology, though even that word felt forced. She wrote things like, "I realize I wasn't perfect, and I only wanted to protect you." But then halfway through, the tone shifted. "I don't understand why you had to humiliate me. After everything I did for you, you turned people against me." It was still the same melody, just slower. Blame wrapped in self-pity. I didn't respond. I folded the letter neatly, placed it in a drawer, and left it there, not as a keepsake, just as proof that even when stripped of her stage, she couldn't change her script. Months passed. My book came out that spring. It wasn't about her, not directly. It was about control, truth, and the quiet rebellion of reclaiming your own story. But people knew, they always do. It became a quiet success. Readers wrote to me about how it helped them leave abusive families, cut toxic parents out, find peace. Every message felt like another small piece of freedom handed back to the world. Then one morning, I got another call from Rebecca. Her voice was calm, almost tender. "She's moving," she said. "Selling the house. She said she can't stand being here anymore." "Where's she going?" I asked. "Some small town up north. Says she wants a fresh start." I just nodded. Let her. And that was that. She left. No goodbye. No scene. Just gone. A few weeks later, I drove past the old house out of curiosity. The paint was peeling. The shutters were off their hinges. The flower beds overgrown. The for sale sign leaned crooked in the yard. For years, that house had been her kingdom, a place where she ruled every inch of it, every person in it. And now, it was nothing more than an empty shell. I parked for a while, just watching it from the car. It was strange seeing it like that. Not triumphant, just quiet. The kind of quiet that feels final. I rolled down the window, breathed in the air, and for the first time, it didn't smell like lemon cleaner or manipulation. It just smelled like freedom. Before I left, I took out my phone and opened the photo I'd kept all these years, the one from that birthday party, the moment she'd hugged me for the cameras, pretending we were close. I looked at that picture for a long time, then deleted it. As I drove away, the house grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it disappeared entirely. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to look back. Because she'd spent her whole life teaching me how to perform, how to edit myself for others. But in the end, she forgot the one rule every storyteller should know: you can lie to everyone, but eventually the truth writes the final chapter.